we leave the visitor center and turn north onto Ford Drive, our first stop is at the corner of Ford and Bellflower, which is a study in contrasts. The first building we see is off to the right is the Mandel School by James Stewart Polchak.
The building is simple. It does not try to make a statement of itself, but being a good contemporary building. Trying to respect and enlarge the street corner and making it a people space by having it set back on an entrance plaza.
So as each of the other three buildings on the other corners, the Dively and the historic Western Reserve campus and the Peter B. Lewis building come close to the street, this one pulls back a little bit and creates a civic space.
Right.
Right opposite is the Peter B. Lewis building by the well-known architect Frank Gehry.
That was not the original planned spot for it, but for other pressures of the expansion of the university, it was moved there.
One of the things that I like best about that building, you know, it has this exuberant, expressionist, you know, form and all that stainless steel. You get these little glimpses of it from all around the University Circle area where you don't expect. You might be up in Murray Hill, you might be over in front of the Art Museum, and you just happen to look, and there it is, kind of peeking back at you.
One of my favorite views is as you walk out the north entrance of the Art Museum, the Breuer entrance, and look towards that. You see the Peter B. Lewis building in the distance. It's on top of the rather more austere law school. And it's kind of a great narrative of the exuberance of the entrepreneur brought down to ground by the corporate lawyers who've got to actually take these great ideas and turn them into legal documents. In a funny way, the pressure that the university put on the architect to take a much smaller site maybe worked in the long run to the betterment, because it became a much more urban building as opposed to a suburban statement, an object. And it's got to compete and create a critical street corner with the historic Collegiate Gothic campus on one side, and with the Dively building, which was built in about that same period of time, and with the Mandel School. So this return to the urban, which we see in the village at 115th, where the dorms are coming back, were put back onto the street, and this development over a period of about a decade of the critical corner of Ford and Bellflower, where the buildings either deliberately, as in the case of the Dively, or by virtue of the fact that the site they were given was smaller than they wanted to, were forced to be more urban. You have a very interesting corner looking both to the past and to the future. Let's continue on Ford towards the Botanical Garden, but before we get there, stop for a moment and let's talk a little bit about the Glidden House, which is a wonderful historic restoration of a grand old mansion, turned into one of the leading hotels, boutique hotels in the city of Cleveland.
It's an example of probably one of the most prominent preservationists in Cleveland for many years, Bob Gady, who did that conversion.
Glidden's a family name, really, a Glidden Paint Company, right?
That's right.
So this shows again what can be done with a historic house to give it new life and do a first-rate job of restoring this building. As we continue up Ford towards East Boulevard, you see over to your left the striking slanted glass walls of the addition to the Botanical Garden, done by Graham Gunn.
Yeah, and this really transformed the Cleveland Botanical Garden from one of those little hidden gems into a serious regional center. Now there's this large greenhouse that has two major displays, one showing the flora of Costa Rica and one of Madagascar. Really cool to walk through, very interesting. Not even to mention their exterior gardens, which are really gorgeous.
So this becomes another one of those regional educational assets that many of the museums have been moving towards.
But then again, as a community asset, was the development of the Hershey Children's Gardens, which is a wonderful, wonderful, exciting place for young people. They can spend hours there.
And then also those stunning wrought iron gates by Albert Paley are a beautiful part of that.
And the grounds sort of bleed right onto and take advantage of Wade Oval, which brings us to the history of University Circle as one of the first major urban park districts in the city of Cleveland. The first stop is in front of the Cleveland Institute of Music, which is a long-standing institution in University Circle. Did in the 60s and 70s, created its campus in that modern style, setting it back from the street. But perhaps the most interesting thing is the addition most recently of the Mixon Hall, which is a fantastic performance venue.
You know, what I see in that is a building that whose design is derived from its function. It holds performance, musical performance and appreciation supreme. But I also see a new building that relates in an interesting way to the existing previous Cleveland Institute of Music building, which has this really neat exposed structural concrete. And the new building uses the surface of the concrete as the primary aesthetic component.
Actually, what we're seeing in this building, we're seeing also in the Botanical Garden that we just looked at. Here, the juxtaposition between a very deliberately modern building and a postmodern structure that's conversing with it. Let's continue down East Boulevard to one of the first attempts to bring these old buildings to new life, the conversion of the Hay and Hannah mansions right there at the corner of Hazel and East Boulevard into the home of the Western Reserve Historical Society, and then the subsequent additions in the 1960s of the very modern and boxy Crawford Auto Aviation Museum, and then the more recent additions to the north of library and entrance foyer done by the local architect Richard Kaplan.
The society itself has done well is take the historicity of the Hannah and the Hayes house and use that for the sense of family history of the area and that sort of thing. But then when we get to the Crawford Auto and Aviation Museum, it treats that in a modern way, and Ernst Payer did that quite successfully. It doesn't call attention to itself. It calls attention to what's inside.
On the one side, the two houses, the Hay and Hannah houses, are the artifacts. They are what's on display. But on the other side, as you said, the modernist building lets the contents be what's interesting.
Part of the challenge you see in University Circle is this conversation between the generations of architects.
Absolutely.
You see it also as you look to the south with the Museum of Art, with the Habel Bennis main building, the Breuer's addition, and then the Vignoli addition on top of that. This conversation that goes on because different generations of benefactors and institutions have different needs and different ideas.
You're not starting with a tabula rasa, and you have to make intelligent decisions about how do you relate to the existing structures. You know, do you imitate? Do you ignore? Do you moderate? There's a lot of little decisions, and you'll see throughout University Circle, architects have done all of these different types of approaches, and you can look at those and ask yourself which are more successful and why.
Let's turn now up 118th Street, turn to the right and go past the Historical Society passed Kaplan's edition, which was designed to resemble a garden wall. It's actually, a building was intended to have a large addition on top of it, which has never happened. And we come really to another one of these very important corners, which has a mix of old and new institutions that have been in the community for many, many years, like Mount Zion Church, residential properties, and one of the largest institutions in University Circle, the VA hospital.
That whole corner, that's really, history, healthcare, faith, living. I mean, it sort of represents a lot of what is vibrant about the University Circle.
Well, we're standing here on Magnolia, which is one of the great streets in Cleveland. It was built at the turn of the last century. It's built by people whose families often were the ones that had the big houses on Euclid Avenue. And the next generation decided they didn't want those large mansions and wound up developing the Wade Park allotment.
One of the things that really impresses me about Magnolia are not just the individual houses, but the street as a whole, as an urban artifact, which, as we noted, is pretty much intact. We can see this as it was meant to be seen. We can experience it as it was meant to be. And that it still has that walkable, inviting character, even though these are, large, grand houses, maybe not mansions, but large houses. It still has that inviting, very pleasant place to be, sense of place. And it just makes it, I think, a wonderful part of a walking tour, and a wonderful, just one road off of the center of the Wade Oval is this little sort of green oasis.
One of the principles that was applied on Euclid Avenue when it was an era of the mansions was that there were no fences between the buildings, and the greensward, the lawn, it's all connected, and the buildings carried out a very similar setback, so that you experience this as a row of houses in a park. And the park setting that you saw in Euclid, that you see also in the later developments up in the Heights, was really pioneered in neighborhoods like this. Most recent developments, like the development of the library for the Western Reserve Historical Society, attempt to maintain that scale, because that is in fact one of the things that's most valuable and unique. Some of the institutions at both ends break the scale, and you get a pretty abrupt shift. Part of what makes University Circle a very robust area is the large institutions, the hospitals, the universities, that are the drivers, but it's attracted around it a whole set of religious institutions, arts institutions, smaller groups that want to be here. Now with the Montessori school and Hawken going in a building down the street, because it's a safe place, it's a university place, it's a convenient place, but it feels like a place that you really want to be. So,
and it has all the riches of the institutions to help feed the educational process,
exactly.
which is the whole reason for being here. We're standing here looking at probably the most magnificent of the houses that were built on Magnolia, designed by Charles Schweinfurth, Cleveland's premier architect at the time, and it was built for Dr. Morrill in 1910, and since 1944 has been known as the Straub-Russell House, when the Straubs took over, and until just a year and a half ago was still owned by them, until it was sold to the Montessori school. The scale is so much greater, much larger than most of the other houses, which most have low roofs and a much more intimate scale, though they're still pretty big. I mean, these are 11-foot ceilings in here. Nobody does that anymore. Besides that, as you notice, it's sitting on a terrace, raising it up above, becoming a royal presence. And that, so it is an imposing thing. Actually, that's the main house, and that's become the schoolroom. Behind it actually is a garage, which is not very impressive, and therefore we didn't try to maintain it. We used the bones and created a space for the sciences there. So again, the messy stuff does not have to interfere with the body of the magnificence of the main house. To the west of it was the Otis house, which has been converted to their dormitories.
It wasn't the Otis house for a while.
A condominium.
Condominium,
Yes,
right?
we took it over. And then across the street, the Ferris house is being converted as we speak to an additional space for the Montessori school for their dining facilities with a proper kitchen.
So they'll have three houses.
And an additional, and the upper floor will be an additional dormitory.
So Montessori will have three houses. And where is Hawken? Hawken's moved out,
Hawken
yeah?
is down at the Mather House.
Mather House. That's
Mather
right.
House, which was by Abram Garfield. And that is actually a place for the Hawken students to come and study.
Mather House, which is currently, of course, undergoing a major restoration and conversion, is a really interesting piece of architecture. I mean, a lot of these houses are. I find that one particularly interesting. This massive stone architecture, this arts and crafts Gothic, but still kind of modern in its own way.
Are we seeing really a great example of some of the best work of at residential scale of the architects active at the time? You have Garfield, you have Schweinfurth, you have Dyer, all of them working for prominent families, coming up with quite different products on this street. Let's turn to the music settlement. It's the second owner of this magnificent property, which occupies a very prominent triangular site at what is now the eastern end of Magnolia. It's a 45-room house. It's not small. These are large houses. This was designed by J. Milton Dyer, one of the prominent architects of his era.
Their success made it necessary for them to expand to a little lesser house on the west, but a very different stylistically, and finally to make it all one. About 25 years ago, Richard Fleischman was commissioned to tie it together and bring it up to date.
Richard also at that time worked with the settlement to create a campus from a set of buildings to add the children's school and to create a real presence. And this speaks to one of the trends. The old families wanted to hold on to the properties and when they convert them to make sure that the architecture is respected and the elements within them, the large spaces, can be used appropriately. We're going to leave the music settlement and move south. And the first thing you notice is Magnolia disappears. It is replaced by a series of walkways, and we go through a college campus, a dorm campus. Now, this was clearly a precinct of University Circle that was planned to be modern. Get rid of many of the streets, put new buildings in, set in green. Fortunately for us, a lot of the interventions were never accomplished, but here you see what was behind the idea, to break the grid of the city, to break the historic patterns, and to come up with something entirely different. We're now down at Juniper and 115th Street. And again, what you see on one side of the street are the modern dorms of Western Reserve University to the north, and the remnants of Juniper, another one of the great streets. But as we proceed down 115th Street towards Euclid Avenue, what you see in the distance is the village at 115th. The new approach is to come back to the street, come back to the urban fabric, to re-embrace density, and to see that being in a city is in fact of value.
Yeah, this is really kind of an example of the new urbanism that we've seen in the last couple decades applied to student housing. And I think a lot of universities are being very thoughtful about how they plan student housing and how it affects kind of the lifestyle and living learning environment that students get to experience.
And also in this new urbanist development, you have one of the key principles applied, which is ground floor retail. You've got cafes, you've got other uses down there that in fact replicate what was once along many of these streets, particularly along Euclid, which was the apartments over the store.
I think it's also interesting there that behind those dorms is the playing field, the football field, so that it gives them green space, but it also does not put what is, I would say, an anti-civic space of the playing field right on the street.
Let's stop here at the corner of Bellflower and 115th Street, and looking to the west, you see Bellflower, like Juniper, like Magnolia, were originally developed as residential streets. It's seen its changes as well.
It's an example of another conversion of a residential house. It was originally the house of a prominent Jewish citizen of Cleveland at the turn of the century, Emil Joseph, and it has been for a number of years the headquarters of the Heart Association. If we wish to continue on down Bellflower, we come to the end of one of the most unique assembly of buildings in the area, and that's Hessler Court, a compilation of single-family, multi-family, small apartment buildings, which for maybe 25 years ago was threatened by the university in its tear down and make modern period, and there was such a din and cry about that, especially by the residents, that it was saved, and with street fairs, and it has become a symbol of what is good about urban living.
It was the first landmark district created by the city of Cleveland with a then new landmark ordinance. And Hessler Court is a wooden street, it's a wooden block street. It's the last remnant of what was a pretty prominent paving technique in the 1870s of wood blocks. And part of the restoration project that the city of Cleveland undertook was in fact to figure out how to replace a wood block street which was falling apart with new wood blocks. While Magnolia is a street with many of the houses intact, almost nobody lives there. Hessler Court, Hessler Road are in fact vibrant, living places. People live there. And some people have lived there most of their adult lives. It's a real community.